It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today we're going to take a look at an article that Thomas Hauser of The Guardian wrote about the Saudi TKO takeover of boxing. We're going to take a look at some updates in all of the antitrust cases. Well, at the very least, 2 of them. We're going to talk about Pat English's second updated letter outlining everything that was wrong with that new Ali Act bill. We're going to talk about Andy Foster. We're going to talk about an English boxing promotion called Boxer. We have a whole slew of things to discuss with you guys. But if you want access to all of it, you're going to need to subscribe with your money because some of it will be behind a paywall. Now, John, how the heck are you?
Fairly good. We're trying something we don't normally do. We're recording immediately after work. So let's see how discombobulated I am after a day of work. I haven't really we prepped and read all the stuff before. When I had a break at lunch, I read it. So I am ready for the comments, but I'm not ready. It's not like I prepped immediately before the show or the stuff is fresh in my mind. Let's see if I slip in some stuff that have nothing to do with the subject at hand by accident.
I have to ask you, though, before we actually roll into the questions that we have in our outline, did you happen to see the video of the first face-off between Jake Paul and Gervonta Davis?
Yes, I did see that. That was right there's the price of admission.
My goodness, what did you think when you looked at that?
Well, I mean, honestly, I was saddened by it because it's a freak show fight. It's a complete spectacle, and that's fine. We're gonna have spectacles because these guys are gonna make as much money as possible. But it's just an absurd fight, and it's not doing. I think some people have been way too, and I guess I've fallen on that too, way too tolerant of Jake Paul and stuff in many ways of what he's doing because. It's like, it's bringing attention. That's true. It's been bringing attention to boxing, but I thought it was much more beneficial to boxing when he's fighting MMA fighters because it was, introducing people to the sport of boxing and getting some attention to it. But now it's just, he's robbing the limelight from what could be big fights and I'm not going to knock Tank from cashing in on this. It's, it's prize fighting. And I don't think Tank has ever been a guy that's been obsessed with titles and things like that. This is just something he does. So I understand why he would want to fight Jake Paul, but Tank fighting Jake Paul, I don't think is, as silly as it sounds, good for the health of the sport, because what's good for it is getting people excited about big fights. And then those big fights lead to people asking, who do they fight next? And so it kind of, it flows downward through the sport, and we're losing that with this absurdity.
We're also a little bit more tolerant of Jake Paul because of what he's done for women's boxing too. I think that figures in a little bit as well.
Yeah, in some ways, yeah, he's kind of won over a lot of people because he's done a lot for women's boxing. But at the same time, it's, and I can't knock him either. There's an audience for this. It's really us, the audience's fault, and it's really the stakeholders of boxing have done a bad job of putting together the big fights that they're not overshadowed by Jake Paul nonsense.
Yep, indeed. So I guess we should jump right into our first topic now that we've gotten that out of the way. We have updates in a couple of the antitrust cases. For the Lee versus Zuva class, what have we heard?
Well, there's been, I guess, a few things out. There was the motion of disbursement of funds, which was submitted, which is a motion to the Judge Boulware, to release the funds, I guess, to approve the final delivery. So I think it's September 30th, he will make his decision. If that is done, the claims will finally be sent out immediately, and we will be done with this case. maybe he has a problem with the way it's being distributed, but they have a whole report by the person distributing it. They've summed up the total amount. They've meeting all of his demands. He had some requests. I remember being in an original hearing when they were talking about this, and he had some requests to get as many fighters as possible. And it looks like they've got 97% of the class, which when I was again in a separate hearing, the judge was incredibly impressed with that they got that large a number, because, I don't think even he thought they would get that number. And that kind of also runs counter to the idea that there'd be a lot of fighters afraid of collecting their claim, because if you look at it, not only did 97% claim of the fighters claim, but 99% of the available money was claimed. I think even more than 99%. I saw it in one comment. And so that means that amongst all the fighters, except for your Moicanos, basically everybody collected their money. The ones that didn't, based on that list of people that hadn't verified or went back and verified their contact information. A lot of them are international fighters that only fought once or twice in the UFC. So who knows where they are in their life right now? If they're even they might not even be aware of this case. They might be guys that just went off to live, in a mountain somewhere, in a cave. And so it's the vast majority of the roster, especially those that had multiple fights, of taken this. They were apparently not so terrified that they didn't get their claim. And 99% of the money, or more than that, compensation suggests that no one that had any sizable amount coming to them turned down their claim. So on that front, it's, that fear seems misfounded, which, goes to another comment. I saw Rob Joyner, bringing up to the MMAFA that the funds, the disbursement should have been publicly reported what people were making. And I kind of agree with them. Just like disclosure, we want athletic commissions to disclose the amount. Maybe the fighters, the amounts they were getting should have been disclosed. I think, if I recall correctly, when we had, I think this is something we talked about, Eric Kramer, I think there was some discussion about having anonymity, because there was some nervousness about fighters, that because there was so much talk that fighters be scared that they were going to give anonymity to people collecting to make sure that they'd get as many people as possible to collect. But in hindsight, maybe that was a mistake to offer that, because I think the vast majority, as soon as the people like Anderson Silva and them crossed the line to collect their millions, I think the rest of the fighters would have followed, and we wouldn't have this kind of unnecessary mystery about who collected, because when basically everybody collected.
What about the Davis versus Zuffa case? Because that's another one that had some updates in it.
Yeah, for Davis, we had a filing, which was the plaintiffs, in this case, the plaintiff, Bill Davis. He filed a motion in opposition to the defendant's motion to dismiss. The UFC filed a motion to dismiss. They make several claims. One is that he doesn't have standing really with these fighters. He doesn't represent them. Their other motion to dismiss was that he can't take part of it because he was part of the league class, so he's waived remedies or other antitrust complaints. And so he filed a motion against this. And I think one argument, I should say, that he makes that I think is pretty strong, is not only is his relationship direct, but as he points out, that even though they waived the right for fighters that are part of the league to take part in other lawsuits, antitrust, that was only for the past. They couldn't do for past damages. It did not protect the UFC from future, and they're claiming for Davis, unlike the other Johnson class members, which covers damages, remember, in the past from today, Davis is purely about ongoing and future damages. It's about, we are not asking for, in fact, we're not even asking for damages in Davis. We are not asking for any money. We are asking purely for a remedy, injunctive relief to change the contracts. And so I think that's, it's an interesting and actually a very well thought out argument by them. And I think that's a good way to get around that the portion of the Lee settlement where fighters agree that they will not take part in other antitrust class actions or other class actions of antitrust nature against the UFC, except for the Johnson case. And they point out that the waiver that they signed really doesn't cover this case. So Interesting things. We'll see what's going to happen. I think October 26th, I believe there's a hearing on this. So we will see what is going to happen with this case going forward. I got a feeling that the judge is going to grant Judge Boulware, based on previous actions, he will dismiss them. He will throw out the motion to dismiss by the UFC or set it aside for now. And this case will continue to progress.
All right. We're going to move into the proposed changes, the expansion, what have you, to the Ali Act bill that TKO is obviously behind. There's no two ways around that. The first thing is that 3 more names have signed on to endorse this new Ali Act bill. Who are they and what does this mean?
Well, just the other day, we had 3 new members of the House, Congress members, sign on as co-sponsors to this bill. Now, people may remember Brian Jack was the original person that introduced the bill, and he had a co-sponsor immediately, was the Democrat Sharice Davids, former MMA fighter. And so it's a bipartisan bill because there's a Democrat and Republican attached to it. Since then, we've had 4 additional members of the House sign on. Addison McDowell out of North Carolina, Christopher Smith out of New Jersey, Derek Schmidt out of Kansas, and Jefferson Van Drew out of New Jersey. The last 3 signed on just last week. And what's worth noting is these 4 additional names, so now we have 5 co-sponsors, are all Republicans. And I think that's worth noting because if you go back and remember when they were trying to expand to the Ali Expansion Act, to expand the Ali Act to cover MMA, they went out to great lengths to make sure that basically whenever there was a co-sponsor on it, a new co-sponsor added, and they got up to like 40. I have to look up the exact number. It might have been 38, 40, might have been higher, might have been up to 50. I can't remember. They had a large number of co-sponsors able to get. But every time they did it, they made very sure that they had 1 Democrat, 1 Republican, or about equal number every time they were added because they wanted to keep that this is a bipartisan bill going forward. They did not want it to get associated with one party or the other. There seems to be no concern of that here if you were just adding Republican after Republican to the co-sponsors. First, we note there's a lot fewer co-sponsors to this than there was on the previous bill. I think a big part of that at the time, the bill was important to Mark Wayne Mullen and everybody in the House. You know, I spoke to people at the time about that, and they all knew this was important to him, and so they signed on, and there was some agreement on both parties. This time, we're seeing people sign on not at the speed they did at the previous bill. Partly because there's just no interest amongst the House because there's a lot of other concerns. Other might be that I don't know if this is a huge priority by Brian Jack. And at the same time, you notice again, it's just Republicans. There's no real bipartisan support except for the original person, Sharice Davids. And this, I suggest to me, and my suspicion is what's going to happen, and a lot of people assume this as well, is that I guess you could say the fix is in, that they know that the Republican Party almost on the line is going to vote for this. They'll get a few more sponsors to get through a hearing. And then in the House, the Congress members, the Republican Congress will vote for this. That's the guess what's going to happen. But right now, I think this kind of indicates that there is no bipartisan support for this bill, but so far at least demonstrated by this, except for the fact that Sharice Davids signed on as the original co-sponsor.
I have a question.
Fire away.
Can this be buried inside of another bill package like they frequently do when they want to pass stuff on the sly?
Well, there are some rules about that, what you can add and can't add to other bills. It's possible, but you would have to have a kind of an up and down vote to insert it into it. But they do that a lot when there's these kind of important bills, omnibus bills and stuff, and they just have all this stuff thrown around and there's no real objections. They can throw it into that. But certain must pass bills, basically reconciliation for the Senate that take 50 votes, this bill, especially the way it's written, does not apply to any of the rules of reconciliation. So it'd still need a 60 vote clearance in the Senate. So, you know, I mean, the one suspicion that some people have is that, and people have talked about this, perhaps, and this applies to the Senate. I think I think in the House, it might be attached to another bill. No one cares. It might just be slipped in. There's just a bunch of formalities to get this to vote, ways to do that. And I just think that the Republicans are going to vote for it. But getting it out of the Senate will be the harder part, because they'll need 60 votes. But one suspicion is that the Republicans have decided to basically, because it's up to the, it's purely parliamentarian rules. It's a norm to blow up the filibuster, as everybody asked the Democrats to do. And if they do that, or make new rules for what requires 60 votes, it's possible that coming out of that, those new rules, new standards, or if they get rid of it completely, that they then move the Ollie Act into the Senate, and they need less votes in the Senate to pass. And because of TKO's connections, that they're aware that this might come down the pipe, and that they're prepared to take advantage of it when the Ollie Act reaches the Senate.
Wow. All right. So Pat English, he's been talking about this for a while, and he sent out a first letter on July 30th, and it started making the rounds around the 1st of August, somewhere around there. So then a second letter was issued by him, an updated letter that outlined everything that was wrong with the bill. And this was to include some of the talking points that you had with him when you interviewed him. Now, this letter went out on September 4th. Go over his talking points for anybody that may have missed our discussions on it and maybe missed your interview with Pat.
Well, I recommend you go back and listen to it, because I have 2 important interviews on that thing I put together. It's a super special episode, because we also have James Quinn talking about the importance of competition. If you don't know who James Quinn is, he is the attorney that represented basically all the major leagues. I mean, literally all the major. He has negotiated on behalf of the NBA, for the NFL, Major League Baseball, Major League Soccer. He was a key player in some of the key negotiations for collective bargaining agreements involving the NBA in the mid 80s, when they got a split of the revenue. He was with the Major League Baseball before that for a little bit. He worked with NFL during the White v. NFL lawsuit, which was the one that broke open the NFL and put pay skyrocketing from that point on. So key guy talking about the importance of competition. And before that, we've got Pat English, longtime attorney, who well known in boxing, well versed, played a part in working with John McCain's people to craft some of the Ollie Act. And so he was on our show talking about this bill, and our big talking points on it on the show was that this was crafted specifically to help one party, TKO. It seems obvious the way the bill's designed. It also basically guts the Ollie Act, even though they claim that the talking point is that it's the Muhammad Ali American Boxing Revival Act. Does nothing to the Ollie Act, doesn't modify it. It just puts the separate track that fighters have the option of signing on to. It really, it allows a promoter to ignore the Ollie Act, because it gives that UBO, Unified Boxing Organization, a carve out, so they no longer have to follow the Ollie Act provisions that protect fighters. And so he wrote a new letter, and he brings up a lot of the points we talked on the show. Now I'm going to, because me and Stephanie are not modest, because we like to take credit for as much as possible. I'm going to take credit for some of his additions and stuff that was from our conversation, that he was reminded of these, because he highlights how it gets rid of the course of contract provision, which is, if you remember, we had not only Pat English talking about that, we had Kurt Emhoff talking about it, how that's perhaps the most successful portion of the Ollie Act. I know as well that I've talked to Lou DiBella. Hopefully I can get him on the show at some point, but I talked to him as well, and he credits the Ollie Act, that's a portion of the Ollie Act that really has worked. And so he also brings up the guidelines for objective and consistent criteria for ratings professional boxers. I want to take credit for that, but that also might be Kurt Emhoff bringing that up a lot lately. So there's a lot of stuff in that bill. And again, he also brings up the separation of sanctioning organizations and bodies. Now, it's very likely he would have brought that up anyway, but we are again going to take credit for that, because that's what this show does, that we're going to take credit. They highlighted that enough that he decided to put that out in public. But it is interesting that he's bringing this up. You're right. He's writing another letter. There seems to be some sense of resistance, I should say. And I think Pat English seems to be one of the big linchpins of that resistance, one of the centerpieces on the boxing side. I know the MMAFA, Rob Macy and them have been reaching out or speaking loudly, hoping to get Alert Boxing. I see some of the promoters talking, but I don't see the promoters. I don't think there's clear cut at the risk or what is potentially going to happen with this bill as much as English is with his letter here.
Just to clarify, what's the point of these letters and who are they sent to, more importantly?
Well, they're technically an open letter to everybody. And I think what he's doing is it's an open letter basically crafting the case so it can be shared amongst the sanctioning organizations, shared amongst the athletic commissions, shared even amongst promoters, shared potentially with members of Congress for anybody that has connections. And it basically, he's trying from a place of expertise because he is a person that's acknowledged in the industry. And I should know, when I asked people to come on the show and talk about the Ollie Act, and I asked several people from all the different promotions and stuff, the one person they kept bringing up is, no, you should probably just get Pat English. He's the guy that knows more about this than anybody. And so he's, in the industry, he's known has been expertise in this. So he's from a place of expertise, from a place of personal experience, from a place of a guy being well esteemed in the industry itself. He's writing a letter that's basically outlining the problems he has with this bill. So when people want to make an argument or make a decision about it, they have this to look at as reference. So I think that's the intent of it. And in addition to sending them, we disseminate it widely because I think it's of interest and importance to perhaps fans and fighters that are not in the loop with those other entities that would get this letter otherwise.
All right. Thomas Hauser of The Guardian wrote an expansive long-form article, and he had two trains of thought, two topics in this article. And one was inside the Canelo versus Crawford fight, and the other was the Saudi TKO boxing takeover plan. So the first, I want you to outline the most salient points that he made about Canelo versus Crawford.
Well, the part I think he was the most, I guess, the salient to me, the part was about the promotion, the involvement of TKO boxing and Dana White. And I guess we'll get to the Saudi part because there's more to the Saudi part than just this. But the part that stuck with me about the match itself, was the fact that I guess he noted the hostilities or the annoyance between Dana White and Turki Al-Sheikh that happened during the event, which everybody else has commented on as well, which now seems, he has better sources than I do. And if people are talking that there might be some friction there, then there might be some friction. And so I thought that was the most noteworthy part. And on top of that, too, is the amount of money they were willing to inject in this event, because, as he noted, again, talking from better sources, is they spent a ton on it. Not as much as maybe some people say, maybe $100 million for Canelo, not the $150 million that's flown around, less than $50 million for Bud, but tremendous amounts of money, which they lost money on, but the Saudis were willing to do so because they wanted this on Netflix. And there's a lot of other stuff. There's interesting political stuff about the possibility that this was not going to be on Netflix, that was going to be on DAZN. And that's all part goes hand in hand with the potential conflict going between TKO and Turki Al-Sheikh. But that's the part I found, the most interesting on that section. I thought that was very noteworthy. That they're, that the relationship is perhaps not as smooth as some people think it is maybe not as tight as Max Kellerman would want it to be. but there is a relationship. That's the gist I got from what he said, and it's coming from Thomas Hauser. It means a lot because a lot of people have complaints because he did, as a member of the media and stuff, he did sign on as being like an in-house HBO mouthpiece. But at the same time, he is a guy that's been around the sport, and he has, I think, a reputation and sources that can provide some weight to some of these comments he makes in this article.
for me, what stood out was the first thing was that we have been saying for a while that those purse prices seemed inflated. We've talked about that both privately and on this show, so I felt vindicated there.
Well, we should note though too, because the two fronts. One is we said before that they're going to be huge purses. But this happens all the time now. We said with Usyk, there's going to be a big purse, and then because people like clicks, because the bigger the number, the more clicks, people just take a number that's already huge and then they make it ungodly huge. That's to the point where it's not even realistic.
Yeah. And then the other thing that got me was the willingness of the Saudis to eat all of the costs, knowing they were going to take a big, big loss. I mean, they are willing to go the extra mile and then some.
Yeah, which is interesting because there's been talk, and he kind of brings it up in here as well, that the purses, just the cash flow from Saudis is that the spigot for the water is being turned off. That no longer is it just a fire hose of cash coming out of them, that they're cutting it back. And we've heard that before. That I can't remember who in the British media brought this up. That originally that they were offering 2 to 3x market value for fighters, so everybody was running to the Saudis, and then later, it was 100% more, and then eventually 60, then 30% more than the market, and so it's been dwindling. And as he also commented, which is interesting, is that, and this is something we've heard repeatedly from people. I've not heard directly from anybody about this, so I can't confirm it's happening, but you've heard it from in certain media sites and people in the industry talk about, is that the Saudis are maybe not the quickest to pay some of the athletes. So some people are still wait a while for their purses. And that a bunch of fighters showed up to this event, not because they wanted there to support it, but they were there in part to get paid, and they left still not having been paid the full portions that were still outstanding owed to them. So, I think that's believable, because there's an article that, again, Rob Joyner on Twitter shared about how the investors are now looking not to the Saudis, who are now not spending as much as they were. They're now looking to the United Arab Emirates as their investors, because they've opened up the coffers and are spending not quite as freely as the Saudis, but a lot. So, and that's, again, all that's believable, because as we've talked about for a while, the Saudis have ungodly amount of money, but at some point they're not going to want to just keep spending it. They want to have see a profit, and also because they're going to run out of oil money at some point. So the whole point of this is to find alternative sources of revenue, not just to lavishly fund people's fantasy projects. And that's the whole reason they brought TKO in, because I'm sure TKO made a pitch like, here's how we can turn this into a lucrative venture in the future.
What stood out to you most about his topics on the TKO takeover itself?
Well, there's a couple things. This is actually a lot more interesting in the article and more worth noting, some of the stuff he talked about, because he highlighted again the original story about what the Saudis, what Turki Al-Sheikh had planned. Remember, was he was going to get around 200 of the best fighters in 12 weight divisions, so 16 fighters per weight division, which is basically lines up to one champ, and 15 of the top contenders, the rated fighters. That's 192 in those total, and that they were going to run this with Dana White, and it was going to be like a constant tournament. I don't think an actual tournament. I think the idea would be just like rated fighters, you move up and down. And that sounded like a much more massive threat to the other entities in boxing, because if you can get the top fighters and you basically have the top 15 in every weight class, how do you compete with that? Right? Only way you're going to get rated at all now, if all the best fighters are in this Super League promotion, is you have to sign with them. There's no way to even get noticed at all. But it was, again, it was kind of a pipe dream, because you have to get all the other stakeholders to sign on and basically sign off or sign away their authority and their business entities. The way I thought they might do this is they'd give shares to the other promotions, and that way that they would they would also profit by the success. In other words, they would just basically, we're going to fold everything together. But that would obviously bring up some antitrust problems in the United States, which is where they want to have this take place because it's the biggest market. There's also the problem is I don't know what they were offering those other promotions. Maybe they weren't offering anything. So why would they sign on? Why would managers sign on and basically sign the rights away to their fighters? In the future, they couldn't get nearly as much money. And that proved to be a hurdle, and also it's just too massive a task. It probably cost too much. And so he reminded us that was the original plan, and that the new plan is much more scaled back. 12 to 14, 16 events per year for Zuffa Boxing. It's going to be basically journeyman, mid-level guys, and 2 to 4 super events per year. So it's a much more scaled back, much less complete takeover of the sport of boxing. I still think it has some certain risks. And I see some of the logic of what I think TKO is doing. If you look at the history of boxing and you look at what we know about the internal finances of boxing organizations and stuff, you notice that there's a handful of events usually per year that generate massive amount of money. I mean, some years it's obvious, one event can generate almost the entirety of the boxing revenue, Floyd Mayweather versus Manny Pacquiao or Floyd Mayweather.
To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!